Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today we'll be discussing my final 2020 Senate election prediction. Now, as you can see, I've already filled in the safe seats. You might notice there are 3 likely seats amongst these. That's because these seats are flips and you can never be truly sure when an incumbent is losing their seat if some shenanigans might allow them to keep it. But in most cases, these races are so safe for the other party, I'm putting it up on the board. Now, if you watched my last prediction, you might be noticing that Mississippi and Alabama have gone from being both likely states for the Republican Party back to being safe seats. Over the past week or so, we've had about 3 polls drop in each state, showing the Republican, in the case of Mississippi, incumbent, in the case of Alabama, challenger, with safe leads of over 50%. As such, they've gone back to being safe seats. Colorado and Arizona have been safe for the Democrats for so long, I was genuinely tempted to turn them to safe blue for a while, but let's not invalidate my own rules on my first Senate election cycle. So let's knock off some likely seats. These are seats which will usually go to a certain party, but there's a chance there could be a shakeup at some point. So for the Democrats, it's Maine and North Carolina. Democrats have polled incredibly well in both of these states and are basically guaranteed to walk away with 50 seats in the Senate, which is close to a Senate majority. If they win the presidency, if they don't, they will be 1 seat behind what they need to win. Both states, Democrats have polled consistently in the lead, except for very partisan Republican polls in North Carolina. As such, likely seats, unless there is either a massive Democratic voter dropout or high levels of Republican turnout, with normal levels of Democratic turnout, these states will both go blue. Now, on to likely seats for the Republicans, which is pretty simple. There aren't any. Republicans are doing very poorly this cycle, and as you can see, we are now going to be entering the toss-up with all seats under controls of the Republican Party. We'll knock off our leans first, because these are not all pure toss-up states. So, where leans where? Well, if you're a Republican, Kansas and Alaska are both in your favor right now. Both of them are leans Republican. The Republican candidates are ahead, but not breaking 50%. And due to the lower populations in these states, a candidate who turns out if the Democrats get in any way higher than average turnout, could very quickly flip the state to the Democrats. So there's Kansas and Alaska for you. Otherwise, Democrats also have Iowa. Now, there's something I want to really emphasize here. It's called recency bias. And everyone does this in elections. So, in 2020, we all remember the polling errors that gave Trump his victory in 2016. The margin of error flipped towards Trump, and he won. In 2012, people forget this is how people thought in 2016. In 2012, all the polling errors went for Obama. Same in 2018. And people assumed, it'll happen in 2016. 2012, they assumed they'd go for Obama because that's how it went in 2008. In 2008, it went for Kerry, so everyone assumed it would go for McCain. They didn't go for Kerry, they went for Bush, so people assumed they'd go for McCain. That's how people assume things are going to flip. Now, Iowa has become more competitive over the last couple of days, but not noticeably more competitive than it's been previously. As such, I'm leaving Iowa as likely. I know a few people are moving Iowa into toss-up or never removed it from toss-up. In my opinion, the Democrats have polled well enough there that despite Ernst leading in 1 or 2 polls, I don't think that the state's going to remain in Republican favor, just based on what we've been seeing. As such, Iowa leans Democrat and will remain as such in my book, because also assuming the polling error will benefit the Republican, it could equally benefit the Democrat, so leans for right now. Now, so these are our 5 toss-up states. I will give a tilt in either direction. This is because I believe there is no such thing as a pure toss-up state. A state always leans in a certain direction. But your 5 toss-ups are Montana, Texas, Georgia, both elections, and South Carolina. All of these races are competitive, and for the future, it is really bad for the GOP to see so many competitive races in the Deep South. They need to keep these seats. They can lose Montana, Kansas, Alaska, and feel comfortable in the long term, but these are high electoral value seats that they are now losing to the Democrats. Well, potentially losing to the Democrats. I mean, over the long term, they will most likely lose them entirely. So let's start off with Montana, the one who I just derided. For right now, Montana is tilt Republican. This is down from leans. Steve Bullock has had a good slew of polling. There has been high turnout in Montana, which is good for him, especially when you see that the Senate race is decoupled from the presidential and gubernatorial races, where the Republicans are far and away leading. For the Senate race, it has been very competitive and very back and forth. In a high turnout election, Montana goes for the Democrats, but for right now, I am going to assume the incumbent has the slight edge and leave it as a tilt Republican seat for right now. Down in the Deep South, we'll get to these guys last. Let's do Texas, the fun one. Another tilt Republican seat. Now, I know Texas broke 100% turnout compared to 2016. That's impressive. It's in favor of the Democrats. However, based on the polling we've seen over and over and over again, Texas looks like it's going to split its votes. It's going to go blue for the president and red for the Senate. I think people hate Trump. They want Trump out. He's speeding up the rate Democrats are taking control of Texas, especially if they take control of the state house. But I really am seeing some vote splitting going on, especially in the suburban white area, which is what you need to win Texas and flip it. So I'm thinking we'll see a blue presidential race in Texas and a red Senate race. I could be wrong. Polls could be off. But I'm going to go with, while Texas is a toss-up, it is a toss-up that leans red. Now for the fun ones, the Atlantic southern states. We'll do South Carolina last. In Georgia, good news for the Democrats. 2 more seats on your board. I was actually really close to moving Raphael Warnock's race. He is the challenging Democrat versus Kelly Loeffler to leans Democratic. I don't feel comfortable enough doing that because we need to see how Election Day turns out before I make a final call on the Georgia Senate race. I'll probably do a little special breakdown video for that. But he's beating both of his opponents in the runoff. He's got 40% in the general election. That's good enough to move this to a tilt. As for the main one, John Ossoff has had a spike in support, while his opponent and incumbent Perdue is losing support. That's a sign. I talk about this every time I talk about the Senate, and it's really important. When a candidate loses support to undecideds, that's bad for them, but they usually can recover. When the undecideds start breaking for your opponent, that's when you start losing, and that started to happen to Perdue. As such, Georgia is also tilt Democratic for both elections. And lastly, we have South Carolina. Jamie Harrison versus Lindsey Graham. A race no one expected to be competitive initially, and is now one of the most competitive races. I've marked it as tilt blue, I've marked it as tilt red, and I'm going to be honest with you. For my final prediction, it's tilt red. If I was going with my gut, and we'll talk about going with my gut in a moment, it would be tilt blue. But Lindsey Graham is the incumbent. He has won multiple times in the state. His third-party candidate, Bosco, or was it Bosco or Brascow? Something like that. It started with a B and ended in a co. Or O. Running for the Constitution Party, dropped out and intentionally endorsed him because they felt Lindsey was in danger. Normally the Constitution Party runs to try and get enough votes so they can become like let's make this, you know how the Greens seem to have the delusion of, well, we could make it so every race in certain states is between the Democrats and the Greens. The Constitution Party has that same fantasy, but with the Republicans. I see Lindsey Graham still with a slight edge here. That doesn't mean he's going to win, but it means he does win 51% of the time. As such, you're left with this final map, which is 53 seats for the Democrats, 47 seats for the Republicans, with a bunch of highly competitive seats in the Republican areas. The Democrats, if turnout is as high as it's looking, could very well have a ceiling now. Keep in mind, a ceiling of about 58 seats. But if maybe 59 if you include Alabama. I'm not sure if I do. I think it's 58 seats in practice. But they also have a floor of 50 seats, which is really bad for the Republicans, who have been on the defensive this time around. And up until recently, it looked like the high watermark for the Democrats, recently, 2 months ago, was about 52 seats. Now it looks like Democrats could very well walk away with a strong majority in the Senate. If you want to know why it's so important for Democrats to get such a big majority in the Senate, look at my video. The Democrats are actually 3 parties. It's on my channel. But speaking about my gut, to go back to that briefly, this is my final official Senate prediction. I'm going to be doing 2 more Senate predictions and 2 more presidential predictions, just based on gut feelings, looking at the polls, taking in the national environment and all that jazz. And those polls, I'm not going to be doing leans, likely, tilt. I'm going to be making calls on states. I'm going to be very aggressive with it. To quote what someone said about lean toss-up, I will be facing God and marching backwards into hell. Those will not be official predictions. They will be a lot more scattered in how I go about them, but will also be a little bit more sort of, let's just go with my gut, go with what I'm feeling, and the national environment, and is a good little experiment to see how close my gut is to Election Day. So with all that being said, if you like the video, drop a like down below, and also leave a comment. Do you think I've made the bad call on states, or do you think I got them right on? If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted when new content comes out. If you want to see more from me outside of YouTube, I do have a Twitter at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description. Otherwise, most importantly, have a wonderful day.